Released in late December of 2021, Deepwoken, the second official title of Nomad Studios, was the next best game on Roblox. It was full of wonder and adventure. Being a paid access game, to hit close to 10,000 players its opening day was incredible to see. The game was full of adventure. Upon release, Deepwoken was a fresh and fun take on the permadeath genre we had grown to love in Nomad's first official title, Rogue Lineage. There was a sense of mystery and wonder, not just surrounding the world, but the gameplay itself. With thousands of different card combinations now possible in the new progression system, there was a never-ending replayability factor as you crafted new and exciting combinations of talents, mantras, and weapons. After a while, people understood the basics of the overworld and set their sights on the next challenge to conquer, the depths. For many people, the depths itself was a death sentence. Whether it be from mobs or players themselves, there was an air of danger that was ever present whenever you entered the depths. Players often would log immediately after seeing one another in order to avoid a costly wipe. Oftentimes you would find boosting services, or maybe you would work with your friends together as a squad to make it to the escape elevator in order to make it back to the overworld and continue your adventure. After the novelty of the new talent system began to fade, the real cracks in the system started to show. Luck, which is never really understood until weeks, if not months into the game's life cycle, fundamentally changed how your each and every progression would play out. At the time of release, your luck stat was invisible, and the only indication you had luck was by a particle effect after killing a higher level player with luck themselves, or by killing corrupted mobs in the depths. The system affected your chances of rolling a rare or a legendary card in your next talent hand, and the luck spent on those cards would need to be replenished every single talent hand. Following the infamous Agamatsu video titled "Why You Should Fight More," ganks exploded across the game with players being killed left and right, oftentimes by higher level players camping Orisia, even though they would not receive luck themselves for these kills. Almost overnight, the game went from a relatively peaceful open world adventure into an all-out war zone. It was actually more rare for you to have a friendly interaction than it was to get jumped on sight and have to fight your way out of the situation, regardless of the island that you were on. Now, all of this is just the tip of the iceberg. Instead of the current Power 20 system, the level system went from 1 to 60, with 5 stat points each level being required to obtain a new talent hand. This took, and I shit you not, 10 plus hours to complete a build with no help of experience boosting talents such as Adept and Mark of the Lone Warrior, which became essential for completing builds in a time frame that didn't make you want to essentially quit halfway through. Now you might be thinking, man, that doesn't sound very fun, but it can't be that bad. Yes, it was. After all of the work that you have spent creating your build and collecting luck, you weren't even guaranteed to have the cards you want. Currently, if you meet the stat requirement for a talent or a legendary, it is guaranteed in your next talent hand. No such system existed in Verse 1. For example, if you had the requirements for Exoskeleton and you had max luck, you could still never see that card across all 60 levels. It became an absolutely miserable gameplay experience, which resulted in players spamming the Trial of One for hours, hoping to get a good amount of rares and legendaries in their early game, and even then, the build could still fail to produce the talents you need after the fact. There were no shrines or options to re-roll or fix your build. What you got is what you got, and if you didn't like it, you need to wipe and roll the dice on another 10-hour plus progression. The only real redeeming portion of the progression system was that on occasion, Arch and Raguzer would bless you with that god build that would roll a rare or a legendary almost every single hand, and the difference in power between these god builds and the normal builds you would see was staggering. I'm not joking. You could legitimately 1 versus 10 people because of that power disparity, and there would be nothing that they can do about it. Now, without shrines or the min-max options, the build variety was nothing like we have. While dual attunement players did exist to varying success, the majority of players stuck to a single attunement as their main choice of magic, with no attunement being the clear best choice across the 5 magics provided at the time. Due to the lack of Shrine of Order, you had to be really mindful of the talents you wanted, and making sure that the limited amount of stats you had to work with all synergized in optimal ways. Because of the essentially free 100 points you'd save with no attunement, we saw the rise of what is to this day the worst meta in Deepwoken history. The no attunement Justicar meta of the summer of 2022. These builds were almost impossible to kill, often having close to 50% physical reduction or more, and 650 HP. Pair that now with the removed ability to stack ever-changing ages and dark ages, you might as well log when encountering a player with these builds described. Things weren't much better on the item ends of things. With the extreme rarity of enchants and gems in the early months of Deepwoken, black marketing ran rampant through the community, and a talented enchant user could almost always win against an equally skilled build and player who did not have access to those top tier enchants. Additionally, the balancing left much to be desired, with enchants such as Chilling, freezing you in a full block of ice on proc, Obfuscation granting an insane buff to swing speed, No Life King granting such massive regeneration that it was close to impossible to knock a wielder without Mind Break potions, and Bloodthirsty granting a base 3 times damage multiplier. The 2 legendary weapons at the time, the Crypt and Curved Blade, hold the title as the strongest weapons in Deepwoken history prior to their respective nerfs. The Crypt Blade boasted an insane 70 base damage with its 15% Shadowcast scaling and procced every single Shadow talent on M1. While the Curve boasted an impressive 35 base damage with the 10% aftercut buff and a swing speed comparable to that of a dagger. The desperate disparity across strength and builds back then is worse than anything we see today, and it almost all relied on if you were willing to risk black marketing or if you had the time to farm hours a day for weeks to obtain these items, or at the very least enough enchants to trade your way into receiving them. While there was a vibrant trading community at the time, they often were backboned by black marketers that would supply said items to third-party sellers and artificially increase the rarity of these enchants or legendaries by sitting on massive bank accounts full of them and rationing out as little as possible at a time. Just to give you an idea of how insane the black market used to be, a Shattered Katana with no stars and an enchant as weak as pre-buff Wild would sell upwards of $60, with things such as 3-star legendaries getting close to $100 per item, sometimes for even more. Now this is where Deepwoken really shined, if you're blinded by nostalgia. While I look back fondly on Verse 1, combat back then was an unfair, buggy mess, with tech such as move stack, flourish stacking, and insanely overtuned mantras and combos that could kill you in seconds if you weren't on guard, and without the ability to vent, there was no way out. Oftentimes we look back at Verse 1 as this golden era, where skill reigned supreme. And while that is true to some extent, it's missing some much needed context. Truthfully, most players in Verse 1 were legitimately terrible at the game, and those few players that pulled ahead and honed their craft would destroy almost every single person they came across. In reality, it wasn't that skill was the ultimate definer. It wasn't that the game was so balanced that the best player always won. It simply came down to most people did not play the game enough to be skilled at it. The average player in Verse 1 is comparable to an NPC in current Deepwoken. It was sweats, just waffle stomping kids that had literally no idea how to play the game. And as the average player's skill increased over time, the sentiment that skill always wins started to fade away as builds and enchants became the clear decider of who would win a fight between equally talented players. Good lord, what a mess. Verse 1 was a buggy, under-optimized mess where wiping to nonsense was just part of the game. For a time, if you did not emote properly on a boat while being attacked by a brainsucker, your character would start to warp randomly, resulting in a permanent game ban by the game's anti-cheat, which could only be reversed, of course, if you had this recorded on a clipping software, which at the time, most players didn't even know they needed to have. Verse 1, if anything, was the true golden age of exploiting. At a time, if there were 18 people in the depth server, I can guarantee you 14 of them were exploiting. It even got so bad at points that Synapse had the ability to grant exploiters the option to see the inventory of every single player in the server. If you joined the server with enchants in your inventory or legendary weapons, a pop-up would flash on the exploiter's screen telling them where you are and what you have. Since back then you would drop enchants and legendaries on death, an exploiter would fly over, knock you using back attach so you have no way to fight back, pick you up, fly to the top of a mountain, and they would tell you, drop everything you have or I'm wiping your build. In fact, it got so bad that at one point there was about a 1 to 2 week period where exploiters could completely delete the floor in the depths, wiping everyone in the server, with some clients being so powerful they could completely wipe the data off every single slot on your account, resulting in every single build being reduced to atoms in seconds. Ultimately, I look back on Verse 1 incredibly fondly. I made amazing memories with friends who I have kept in my life for years, and I will always cherish the times I spent on this game and the channel that I was able to create because of it. But when you look back objectively, Verse 1 truly was a miserable gameplay experience. It would be more accurate to say that Verse 1 served as a year of public testing, while Verse 2 could signify the beginning of Deepwoken's legitimate beginning as an official title. Goodbye, Verse 1.